everybody.
Good afternoon.
I don't even know as I need this. I always had that voice that, needs improvement when it came to rest quietly. It hasn't much changed.
Try this way.
Is there a turn this one?
That's good.
See, because I don't know if all the other speakers have a voice, that. You are the right color today. You are the right color today. You. Right? I like the color. I'm Benita Zahn. I'm with the News Channel 13 here in the Capital Region, for those of you who are from out of town. And boy, what a fabulous day to celebrate these remarkable women, as the community of Saratoga is obviously celebrating the flag, and for all of us to get together, because we really, I think you probably all, it's the energy in the room that managed this. I went online. Going online is just wonderful these days, and I Googled the phrase, women in the military, just by Google, and it came up with what it says was about 9,700 hits. Women in the military, just on Google. And then, of course, I started doing some reading, and I stole, because some of the folks who've written were really wonderful. What I didn't realize, the numbers were so big, that there are almost 2 million women veterans. From the American Revolution, to Panama, to Bosnia, Kosovo, Afghanistan, and Iraq. Women have served in every conflict in some way. Oh, not that they were legal in the early days. History tells us that 33,000 women served in World War I, and almost 500,000 took part in World War II. And some of those vets are with us. During the Korean War era, 120,000 women were in uniform. 7,000 were deployed in theater during Vietnam. During Desert Storm, 7% of the total U.S. forces deployed were women. Over 40,000 of them. Today, 2 of my girlfriends have been deployed, 2 of my running buds. One of them is in Germany, and she said, luckily she's not in harm's way at this time, and she's doing some marathons, and the other one has been moved and stationed in North Carolina, and simply just waiting, as we all just wait to see what the fates have in store for her. And since colonial times, there have been odd parallels between this country's attitude toward the military and the military's attitude toward women. Both were celebrated in theory, but distrusted in fact. The reality of both was criticized and rigidly controlled at the same time. Their symbolism was almost worshipped. Ideally, both were supposed to appear when needed, successfully complete the mission at hand, and then just disappear. While the contributions of the military are well known, contributions of women to the military have largely been ignored or even denied. But these women who are with us today are going to stand up proudly and let you know the role they played. I just want to share one fun story with you before we move on. I don't know if any of you know the story of Deborah Sampson. Noonie, you know the story of Deborah Sampson. And I think a lot of it is legend, and I don't know if any of you ladies do. So whatever I share with you is the composite of what probably the real story is, but boy, I would love to have had a cocktail with her. In October of 1778, Deborah Sampson of Plymouth, Massachusetts, disguised herself as a young guy. And she presented herself to the American Army, and she said she was there and she wanted to volunteer and oppose the common enemy. So she enlisted for an entire term as Robert Shirtliff, and she served for 3 years. She served in various duties. In fact, she was wounded twice. The first time by a sword cut to the side of her head, and then 4 months later, she was shot through the shoulder. Her sexual identity went undetected until she came down with brain fever, which was apparently very prevalent back then among the soldiers. The attending physician caught on. But he didn't say anything. Listen, she was wounded twice, got away with it, and third time, you think he was going to mess with her? Instead, he had her taken to his own home, where she was going to receive better care. He wanted to make sure she was all right. When her health was restored, the doctor then met with her commanding officer, and subsequently an order was issued for Robert to carry a letter to General Washington. And this is probably where some of the legend occurs. Well, the order came, and the bottom line is she got an honorable discharge. But then after the war, she got married, and she had 3 children, and during George Washington's presidency, she got a letter inviting Robert Shirtliff, or rather Mrs. Gannett, who she had married Mr. Gannett, to visit Washington. And it was during her stay there, a bill was passed granting her a pension, in addition to certain lands, which she was to receive as acknowledgement for her services to the country in a military capacity as a Revolutionary War soldier. And the bottom line to all this, she was rather embarrassed by it. And she really didn't want all the fuss and didn't quite understand what it was all about. She was doing what she believed was right and did what she could. And I have a feeling that's probably the vein that runs through the story of all of the women you'll hear from today. So I'd like now to ask Frederick Altman, the president of the New York State Military Heritage Institute, to come on up and get things rolling. Thank you.
Benita, let me personally thank you for being here today as our moderator, because when we have these forums and these outreach programs at the Institute and at the museum, it adds a lot to have a real pro to run the show other than just us amateurs trying to muddle through it, and we appreciate that. On behalf of this museum, the New York Military Museum and Veterans Research Center, and the New York Military Heritage Institute, that's a mouthful, isn't it? It's my pleasure to welcome you. The museum, as you can see, is undergoing a few growing pains since it was opened by the governor last year, and I'd like to invite you all back this summer. We're a little behind schedule, but when all of the galleries get open and all of the displays are brought up, I hope you'll come back and visit us again. The Institute, which I'm privileged to serve, comprises the group of veterans and volunteers who back in 1991 chartered the original museum. It was not at this location. And we got it going. The governor finally dedicated this armory for the permanent home of the museum. And at this time, the Institute promotes the museum with programs such as this, educational programs, and with fundraising and endowment. Don't worry, we're not going to pass the plate. Actually, we thought about passing a steel pot because it holds more, but we're not going to do that either. I'd like to acknowledge the director of our museum. I don't see Mike Akey. Mike, where are you? Mike is the gentleman walking around with the distinguished-looking chin whiskers. There he is. Mike runs this place, and we'll be welcoming you all when the renovations are done. The program doesn't happen just because we invite a bunch of people to show up. And I want to acknowledge a few folks who helped make this program a reality. The overall chair of the program, who's very modest and said she'd like to remain anonymous, is Marie Anonymous Gould, so she can remain anonymous. But we thank her. Her committee, of course, Noonie Fortin, Hattie Finch, our public relations director, General Tom Gallagher, Betty Willett, and Linda Otto, all participated, and others, in putting this program together, and I express my appreciation to them. Now, I'm very proud, and we're honored to host this important forum honoring the contributions of the women of America's military history. And we are so honored because as our nation celebrates each milestone of our military heritage and pauses to mark each anniversary of great moments in our history, we honor those who have served and who have sacrificed, and those who have shed blood, and limb, and even life itself. And as we go about embracing these rituals, year after year, we see throughout the history of our country the contributions of the women of America who have come to the aid of our nation every time our nation was in need. Throughout our history, the women of America have served America's military in all of its branches and on all of its missions and in all of its campaigns. As Benita pointed out, sometimes unofficially, sometimes not quite legally, but always with great distinction. They came freely and they came voluntarily. They weren't drafted. And they came out of love for their country and with duty in their hearts, and they served with devotion and with determination and with distinction. And they displayed heroic courage and uncommon valor. You know, long before our 35th president issued his challenge to national service, the women of America had already established a proud heritage of asking not what their country could do for them, but what they could do for their country. And they have always answered that challenge. And they came, and they served, and they sacrificed, and they helped keep America safe, and they helped keep America free, and they have helped keep America great. Even today, as we sit here in this historic armory on this lovely spring day, the women of America are serving in our uniform at this very moment on the front lines of the defense of liberty all around the globe. These, my friends, are the women of America. You among us are the women of America. And America salutes you. Thank you. I'm happy to
Thank you very much. You know, we've got a lot of serious stuff, but I'm struck by, you know, women being there and doing what the guys do, and it's sort of in its own way, I think about, was it Ginger Rogers said in Dancing with Fred Astaire, she did everything he did, but she did it in heels and did it backwards. Sometimes I think that for the women it was much like that, while not in heels, but a whole different set of constraints that they had while doing the same thing, which in some ways made their job even that much tougher. I'd like to just recognize, before I ask, we're going to ask Chelsea Donnelly to come up and lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I'd like to just acknowledge Helene Van Cleef. You're here, Helene? She is from the Bronx Jewish War Veterans, and she came up to join us today. Thank you very much. And now if Chelsea Donnelly would come up and lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Chelsea joins us today from Brunswick, which is a little bit of a drive from Saratoga, so thank you for coming and spending your time with us. Now I'd like to ask Colonel Jake Landry to come on up, and he recently found out he retired as a lieutenant colonel, is what I should say.
I didn't tell you that.
Lieutenant colonel. He had 4 years active duty in the 9th Infantry in Vietnam. He received a Bronze Star for his work in Vietnam, his work with Vietnamese children. He retired from the reserves. He's been a substitute teacher, and he's a docent here at the museum. And he's really just a good guy. So you've got a special remembrance for us now.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Benita. And today, we are going to pay tribute to Lieutenant Colonel Frances M. Liberty, friend, sister, aunt, and to many of us, we will remember her as a high-spirited U.S. Army nurse soldier with a special twinkle in her eye as she would share her stories. Lib was 80 years old when she passed away, was buried on March 5th with full military honors. I saw her at the wake. She was wearing her dress blues and she was clutching her rosary beads. She was born in Plattsburgh, as she would say, 14 September 1923. And it just so happens that nearly 100 years before her birth, on September 14th, or 14 September, there was another Frances involved with the birth. Francis Scott Key wrote the Star-Spangled Banner on September 14th, 1814. She was born in Plattsburgh, moved with her family to Waterfleet when she was 9, and later trained as a nurse. She earned a bachelor's degree from Columbia University, a master's from Catholic University in Washington, D.C. She enlisted in the Army in 1943. And back then, it wasn't, and some of these women might reflect the same thing, it wasn't the most popular thing to do for a woman to go into the military. She served her country in World War II, the Korean War, and later in Vietnam. I first met Colonel Liberty, or I saw her speak at a retired officer's function. She was the program. She was the program, no question about it. And I really enjoyed her comments. And a few years later, I got involved in the Federal Veterans Oral History Project. Some of you may have already been interviewed by that or by the state. And the focus is recording interviews, especially of World War II veterans. Guess who I called? Frances M. Liberty. And I said, Liv, I'd like to talk with you about something. And so we had breakfast. Because one of the things, at least from my point of view, one of the things that Liv liked to do is she enjoyed eating. Am I right, or is that anybody? So I said, Liv, can I meet you for breakfast and we'll talk about this? So she said, yes. We hit it off, and I said, I'd like to interview you for this Veterans Oral History Project. She said, Jake, I'm not going to make a decision today. I said, okay. And I was just, as laid back as I could be, and I said, would you mind if I called you in 2 weeks to get your decision? And if you say no, then that's all right. That's cool. About 3 days later, the phone rings, and it's Liv, and she says, for those of you who would know her, she said, I'll do it. Very assertive. She said, I like the way you approached me on this. I've turned a bunch of people down before, but I'll do it. So, as a result, we now have a DVD of that interview that I did with her. It's in the Library of Congress. It's one just like this. Our museum, our state museum, did one. This is a videotape of her, and it's here. So this is a little bit of her legacy. And I'm in the process of getting copies of these to the U.S. Army Women's Museum in Fort Lee, Virginia, because I think her story is so powerful that they need to, more people than the people in this room need to hear it. And there are two people today that are going to help me a little bit with this tribute that I'd like to call on to each share a special story about Liv. And one is an author who is also a friend, and the other is a niece. Now, the author wrote this book, Women at Risk. The author's Noonie Fortin, who, guess what, she's very highly involved in this whole program. And I got to meet Noonie last year, and it was kind of a surprise because Noonie didn't know that Liv was going to be here. And they hadn't seen each other in a year or so, and they met. Guess who is in the first chapter about women in the military in this book? Frances M. Liberty. So, Noonie, if you could, just for a minute or two, share something special about Colonel Frances M. Liberty. Thank you.
Thank you, Jake. I met Libby back in 1988, and she and I did become friends over the years. One of the things I remember her telling me the most was as a very young lieutenant over in Europe, they had nothing better to do one day How nurses didn't have anything better to do one day, I will never know. But she had nothing better to do one day, and she and a bunch of her nurses decided to commandeer one of the base buses. They went for a tour of whatever part of Europe they happened to be in at the time. I said, that's pretty good, seeing as how she's now a lieutenant colonel many years later. I wanted to know if she was ever taken up on charges for it. They never caught them. They returned the bus safely. She was a special lady, and she would seldom talk about her journey through life in the military. But when you actually got her to sit down and talk about it, she did in fact open up. And she was a special lady, and I will always remember her. Thank you.
Thank you, Noonie. This next young lady I met at Liv's wake, and she had what I sense was a very special relationship with her Aunt Frances, as she would refer to her. I called her Colonel Liv. I would call her and say, Colonel Liv, this is Colonel Jake, how are you today? And we got along fine. But Meg Anatola, her niece, I met that the night of her wake. Very special relationship. And Meg, I'd like to have you come up and just share some things that we might not know about in terms of Frances M. Liberty from the point of view of a relative. Thank you, Meg.
Hi. Frances M. Liberty. She used to say, remember, that's Frances with an E. And I'll tell you, if she got mail that had Frances spelled with an I, she ripped it up. She didn't even look at it. My cousins and I, after a funeral, were asked, what one word would best describe her? And we all said tough. So I looked it up in the dictionary. Tough. Capable of sustaining great tension or strain without breaking. She was all of that and more. Regards to her Army career, when she was storming the beaches in Italy in World War II, when she was riding the hospital trains in Korea, and of course her 3 tours of Vietnam, which she didn't talk much about. Tough. It's possessing great physical, moral, and intellectual endurance. She was all of that, of course. When she gave us wounded soldier in Nam the rosary beads, and sat with him and said the rosary. Of course, he was Jewish. But she sat with him and talked to him. He was shipped out. She never saw him again. However, years later, she received a package. It was a brand new set of rosary beads and a letter from this soldier, who had a granddaughter and who was named Liberty. The last definition was rowdy. Boy, was she a character. At Walter Reed, she was telling us one day at dinner, there was an older officer who was blind, and they had to put an IV in him. And of course, he did not allow any females to take care of him. So she was off duty and going out, and they had asked her to come and try just once. Of course, she went in, she had the corpsman explain everything she was doing like he was doing it. And at the end, the blind officer said, thanks, Lib, but don't think you got away with it. I can smell you a mile away. My aunt had a signature perfume, and it was taboo, and if anybody smelled it, it was strong. But that was Aunt Lib. Recently, I received a letter from retired Brigadier General Clara Adams Enders, and she wrote, I first met Captain Frances Liberty, or Libby as her friends called her, in 1961 when I was a young lieutenant at Fort Dix. She and I were assigned to a new intensive care unit. She was so helpful to me and taught me so much about the hands-on practice of nursing. I remember that experience and association. She also taught me another thing, to have some fun in life, and that all work and no play made you dull. That was Aunt Frances. In 1987, I was promoted to General-in-Chief of the Army Nurse Corps. I had an occasion to call Libby. I reminisced about our old times together at Fort Dix, and she said, well, I'll be damned. Clara, you have done well, and I'm proud of you. She was a great, proud Army nurse who served her country in defense and served it well. As I was growing up, my Aunt Frances was the one that was away in the Army, and we sent her care packages. Christmas time was Christmas ornaments. Easter, of course, she had to have an Easter basket. Can you imagine a 40-some-odd-year-old woman over in Vietnam getting an Easter basket? And then there was this book, MASH. My mother wrapped that up in brown paper, I'll never forget that, and sent it to her. It wasn't allowed over where she was, we were told. As I grew older and Aunt Frances retired, I'll never forget, we had so much fun with her. She was very wise, she was a great listener, and a fountain of advice. She was the aunt that always sent us, on December 1st, our Advent calendars. And until the end, our children even got them. And I'll tell you, at the end, she was still in command. She commanded up to the end. And yes, she was tough. Thank you.
Thanks, Meg. Thanks very much for the heartfelt stories and reflections on your Aunt Frances. I have a more recent story. Last year, in my spare time, I worked with a local social studies teacher after school who had a group of 8th graders who were interested in World War II. And I spent several hours after school. I taught these kids, and it was boys and girls, how to salute, how to stand at attention, how to march. I gave them some elements of history from World War II. But there was something missing. And guess who I thought of? So I called. Colonel Liv, this is Colonel Jake. I've got something to offer you. Well, I asked her, and she said, I don't know, Jake. I don't know. I said, okay, here's the deal. I'll pick you up. I'll take you to the school. I'll get your wheelchair there. You'll talk to these kids. We'll go to dinner. And she said, yes, I'll do it. She did, and it was a fantastic experience. And what I remember most about it was what the kids said after. And now I see these kids in high school, a year or more later. And they asked me not about the museum or anything. They didn't. They liked it. They enjoyed the stuff they did here, and because we took them to the museum, they enjoyed the marching and everything. But what they always ask me is, hey, that Army nurse was really cool. She was great. Now, what I'd like to do is wrap this up. I dubbed some segments of a tape that we have here of an interview with Liv. And it's her responses to some questions. And you've gotten a little bit of a flavor, and now you're going to hear it from her. And I know she's up there smiling and say, Jake, you shouldn't be doing all this, but yes, Liv, we are. We're proud of you, and we want to share this. So, be patient with me. And the first question that she will respond to is a question about, why did you enlist? This is 1943. The war is really in gear. And here's her response.
Because I was a moron, and I thought it would be a big adventure.
Big adventure, and that's the way she was. And now she's going to talk a little bit about the war in Europe. And again, you're going to catch the flavor of our very special person.
We lived in foxholes with the fellows, not with the fellows, we lived in foxholes that they dug out for us. And we used a bigger foxhole for our little hospital until we could get out. Because nobody died on us. They didn't dare.
if I could just picture myself, the way she ran things, and tough is a great word that Meg used. You didn't want to die on Colonel Liberty, or whatever her rank was at the time. Now, this is one that I've heard a couple of times, and it always makes me smile. And it's about going to the bathroom. So if any of you are offended or have never done this before, you can leave, but listen to this.
We stopped off and filled refilled first aid stations and stuff. As the women, we had to go to the bathroom regularly. And we wore slacks. No, we didn't have any problems in most of the places, but we got to this one place, and I don't know if they'll let you keep this in the tape. And there's a slit trench. Now that's difficult for women with slacks on, you know that. So we went out and we said to our chief, that's a slit trench, we can't use that. So she went and found an officer in charge, and she said to him, something has to be done. These are slit trenches and my ladies can't use them. He said, sir, if they're sufficient, tell them to use them. She said, sir, my ladies are setters, not pointers. So they did something. And then we...
Setters, not pointers, and I've heard that story a couple of times. Then the next comments are about what she was doing in Korea.
But the back and forth, the Pope did not come out.
I'm sorry, I skipped the war. This is a story about the Pope. This is it's still in Europe. It's a good Pope story. Listen.
The Pope came out, I think, in 1945 for the first time after the war. That was one of the most beautiful sights you'd ever want to see. He came out in a litter being carried by the Swiss Guard. And he wore a diamond this big right here. And now the crazy Americans are out there. And it's raining. And there's mud all over. Now the Americans, when he approached them, knelt. The Italians stood up screaming, "Viva la Papa!" There's a doctor next to me, and he pokes me, and of course the Americans are crying. Pokes me, and he said, "I don't know what the hell I'm crying for. I'm a Jew." But many years later, he remembered that. He said it was one of the most awe-inspiring things that he's ever seen.
And now we're going to get to Korea, and again, you sense what this woman is really about.
Tokusan, soul. It's a soul. The chief nurse there was a friend of mine. And she said to me, "What did you do now?" And I said, "Why?" She said, "Well, they're going to take you off the trains." I said, "That's okay." She said, "They're going to send you up to one of the MASH units." I said, "It's okay with me, Joe." And the doctor that was in charge of the trains told her flat out, "No way are you taking her. Because when she comes down, all of her patients are alive. They didn't dare die."
That's lit. Now we're going to jump ahead to Vietnam. And this is, again, a story about a tough lady with a lot of pride, but with that twinkle.
He sent us to Long Binh. And from Long Binh, they issued us fatigues and all that stuff, and they gave you your duty assignment. Well, they assigned me to Saigon. I had to go back to Saigon. And they said, in Dusenhans, you know what a Dusenhans is, with benches along the side, there were 3 civilian women, me, and about 5 GIs. Sitting there. 6, 4, there were 12. There was 8 GIs. And along the road, we got under attack, and we had to get out of the get into the ditch. These two women wouldn't get down into the ditch. They didn't want to get dirty. And this one says to the sergeant, "I'm General Abrams' secretary. You're going to be in big trouble if you don't stop talking to me like that." So I stood up and I figured, what the hell can they do to me? I said, "Get down in the ditch." She looked at me and she said, "Did you hear who I am?" And I said, "I don't care who you are. I know that you're endangering a lot of people. Now get down in the ditch before I throw you in the ditch." "I want your full name." I said, "Get down in the ditch." She got down in the ditch. So after everything was over, I said to the sergeant, "A piece of paper and pencil?" He said, "Yes." And I wrote down my name, my rank, my serial number. I handed it to her and I said, "Here, I don't want anybody else to get credit for this. You be sure you give the general my name. And then when you do, you tell Liv said hi."
As you can see, that's typical. The final question, if you had it to do over again, would you get back into the military? What would you do it? And I'd like you to listen especially to how she finishes, because we're getting close to finishing this tribute. But this is a significant comment that she makes that we all should pay attention to.
In a heartbeat, as a matter of fact, when the Gulf War was, I had itchy feet. When they started the Gulf War, I almost felt like I should pack. God would change my life. There's a few things I would have done differently, but those were personal things. But I wouldn't change my life for anything. I'm glad I was able to do all the things I did, travel the way I was. I can't do those things now. And I'm glad I did everything I could. I enjoyed my life thoroughly.
I enjoyed my life thoroughly. I hope that we can all say the same thing as we're approaching 80 or when we get past 80. Liv, we thank you. We thank you for touching our hearts. We thank you for your friendship. We thank you for your military service. And we thank you for the rich memories and stories that will become your legacy. Liv, we salute you. And we gratefully applaud your life.
Okay, thanks very much for that. And Meg, I had the pleasure of meeting her on a couple of occasions and interviewing her. And the first thought I had was, this is one tough cookie. And she's really put the class in the word tough when it comes to women. And it's my pleasure now to be able to meet you, too. I'm just going to give a reminder as we get into the next phase of the program, because I realize that I forgot to do it, so when I sit down, you don't think I'm weird or rude or reaching for candy or something. If you have cell phones and you haven't put them on the buzz, do that, so that we don't interrupt anymore here as we continue. I love the little music, We're going to start on now introducing some of the women, or I should say really all of the women who have come today to share their stories with you. And I know the tough part's going to be for them to shoehorn their stories into about 10 minutes each. And first up, I'm going to introduce Frances Iwansky. She was with the U.S. Army Nurse Corps during World War II. She now lives in Amsterdam. She's a real smart lady. She winters in Florida. Amsterdam's cold in the winter, as you all know. And when we were just chatting, I learned that she treated the wounded after D-Day, and probably stories galore. So Frances, why don't you come up and kick things off? We need applause. We need to praise it up.
veterans, ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry, fellow veterans, ladies and gentlemen. After graduation from Long Island College Hospital in Brooklyn, New York, my friend and I joined the Army Nurse Corps October 42. With so many enlistments of doctors and nurses, 5 hospitals in Brooklyn got together and formed a complement of doctors to form the 79th General Hospital. We were activated in this unit on November the 5th, 1942. During basic training, we worked at Camp White and in Oregon. Then we returned east and sailed from Fort Devens, Mass, October 1943 to Northern Ireland. There, the 79th Hospital was in Nissen huts with cold, hot-bellied stoves for heat. Soon we became the busiest hospital in the United Kingdom. As the troops moved to England to prepare for the invasion, we left for Southampton, England. After D-Day, the casualties were overwhelming. As a hospital with a pier in Lower England, we received patients directly from France. Casualties arrived by ship, rail, and planes. Our capacity was just over 1,000. More than 18,000 casualties passed through a period of 3 months. The critical patients were admitted. Others were sent by plane or rail north to other hospitals. After VE Day, May 8, 1945, we sailed for France, where the 79th stayed to take care of American soldiers and German prisoners. 6 other nurses and myself were sent to the 2nd Medical Dispensary in Frankfurt, Germany. After 3 years and 4 months, including over 2 years in Europe, I left Germany for Le Havre and sailed home, discharged Christmas Day, 1945. Medals I received were the American Campaign Medal, European, African, Middle Eastern Medal, World War II Victory Medal, and the Occupation of Germany Medal. I am a life member of the American Legion Post 701 and the Disabled American Veterans. Also a member of the Reserve Officers Association, the Polish American Veterans, the Collier County Women Veterans, and the Women in Military Service for America. That's in Washington, D.C. I skipped. The World War II military newspaper was the Stars and Stripes. Lieutenant Frances Slanger, in her tent in Belgium, was one of the Army nurses who signed a letter written to the Stars and Stripes. Sure, we rough it, but compared to the way you men are taking it, we can't complain, nor do we feel that bouquets are due us. It is to you we doff our helmets. To every GI wearing the American uniform, for you, we have the greatest admiration and respect. 17 days later, October the 21st, 1944, Lieutenant Slanger died of wounds caused by shelling of her tented hospital area. Through the same newspaper, hundreds of soldiers replied to all Army nurses overseas. We men were not given the choice of working in the battlefield on the home front. Oh, I swore I was going to do that. But we cannot take any credit for being here. We are here because we have to be. You are here because you felt you were needed. So when the injured man opened his eyes to see one of you concerned with his welfare, he couldn't but be overcome by the very thought that you were doing it because you want to. You endure whatever hardship you must to be where you can do us the most good. Adverse conditions apply to some served in the service. Nurses in the South Pacific face the enemy, hunger, and diseases such as mosquitoes carrying a host of deadly parasites known as malaria. All the hospitals were on cleared land, no tents, only beds for patients and for all medical personnel. There was a shortage of quinine and many were sick with malaria. Doctors and nurses, even the seriously ill, still cared for patients. Some hospitals and quarters were in tunnels. Seeing daylight and getting fresh air was rare as the bombing continued almost continuously. Women in the Army Nurse Corps did not think of themselves part of the profession of arms. They were in the Army, they wore the country's uniform, the insignia of military rank, but they were healers, not soldiers. The men they worked side by side were doctors, medics, orderlies, attendants. They were no longer colleagues and staff, but they were comrades in arms and were a military unit in the middle of battle. They were women at war. All soldiers, all veterans, I might skip some of that here. Thousands of men and women were decorated in the wars in World War II. More than 1,600 nurses were decorated for meritorious service and bravery under fire. Decorated for meritorious service and bravery under fire. Decorations with the Distinguished Flying Cross, Soldier's Medal, Bronze Star, and the Purple Heart. 5 hospitals, hospital ships, and a general hospital used during the war were named after Army nurses who lost their lives in the service of their country. The GIs were the best and most respectful patients I have had the honor to serve. We were American nurses there for them. As they improved, their smiles and humor helped make our days more pleasant. I would like to take a moment and read this to you. This is a letter left by a Vietnam nurse at the base of the Vietnam Memorial. This poem is also on the monument engraved in Greater Rochester, New York. Hello, David. This is the poem she left. Hello, David. My name is Dusty. I am a night nurse. I will stay with you. I will check your vitals every 15 minutes. I will document inevitability. I will hang more blood and give you something for your pain. I will stay with you and I will touch your face. Yes, of course I will write your mother and tell her you were brave. I will write your mother and tell her how much you loved her. I will write your mother and tell her to give you your bratty kid sister a big kiss and hug. What I will not tell her that you were wasted. I will stay with you and I will hold your hand. I will stay with you and watch your life flow through my fingers to my soul. I will stay with you till you stay with me. Goodbye, David. My name is Dusty. I'm the last person you will see. I'm the last person you will touch. I'm the last person who will love you. So long, David. My name is Dusty. David, who will give me something for my pain?
They always say don't follow kids' cute animal acts. I know I've got to add you to the list, Francis. Thank you very much. You're a tough act to follow. I figured you put on a little nice eye makeup so you wouldn't let yourself cry today. I should have used the other mascara. Noonie was just telling me that Dusty lives in San Antonio, Texas.
Still alive?
Yes.
Still alive.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
My granddaughter was
some of that on the computer, but she didn't say that.
Yeah, so maybe next year when you all get together again and this room is too small,
Yeah,
and there will be pictures of women hanging in this room
right,
too,
right.
then maybe Dusty can
You
come
know,
on.
Glens Falls, on that monument that I spoke for
Yeah.
Memorial Day, has 2 pictures of women.
Does it?
Yeah.
And I have to point out, we got chatting and she said she had 15 minutes and I said, I don't think so.
That's why you made it cut down.
I mean, if you'd gone through it all, we'd just be all with one big, we'd all be incredibly, as they say on Saturday Night Live, verklempt. We'd be done. But Frances, thank you. Thank you very much. And also, the reason I asked her to chop it down a little bit is so that we have time for you all to be able to ask some questions afterwards. Thank you, that was beautiful. And I have to wonder, our next speaker is Marie Deal, and Marie was also with the U.S. Women's Army Corps during World War II. I don't know, did you two cross paths
What was that?
when you served?
Did you
No,
serve?
okay. She was a medical lab technician, and she wanted to join the Waves, but because her husband was with the Navy in the South Pacific, there was a rule against that, you know. So instead, she joined the Army. She now lives in Amsterdam, and she's very active in the American Legion. And Marie, it's your turn. Remember the applause thing when they come up.
Can you hear me all right? Okay. I have 2 things here. These actually were written for others, but anyway, but I am speaking not just for myself, but for people wonder about the women who join. All right, how much do we know about those women who through the years have given themselves freely and without restraint to serve their country and freedom? I am not waving the flag particularly for them, or asking for any more special attention for them than for all those men who likewise have given their best for their country. But I thought you might like to know a little more about them, to know them as real people. Why do these women who served in our many wars enlist? For many reasons, but not the ones that the jokes are about. I assume that people from back then anyway know of the jokes. Just a few cases may make this more real. A woman veteran of the Civil War enlisted as a man so she could be with her husband, a doctor, and help him as he served. In World War I, most women went as nurses or as medical personnel to assist the wounded and to enable more of the servicemen to return to healthy and productive lives. I know that in World War II, I enlisted to feel that I, as well as my husband and brothers, would be helping to finish the war sooner so that all could return to living our American way of life. Incidentally, we believed in the American way of life. I would like to mention, however, a friend of mine in basic training who just after entering received a posthumous Silver Star for her husband for heroism in the disastrous assault on Monte Cassino in Italy. She was quiet. She didn't brag. She just did her best. We didn't intend to be heroes, but we all tried to help. We came from all walks of life. We knew what we gave up, but we thought it was important to do so. Just as our present-day counterparts in, now this was written at the time of Desert Storm. In Desert Storm, we also waited for mail call and continued to wait. In other words, there were many that nobody wrote them letters, and they were very sad. Like them, though, surrounded by many, we were each alone. We were all one for the good of our country and its ideals. History is now being made by a new generation of service people. whether they will be involved in conflict or not. Now we know that they have. Let us be proud of them and do all we can to make their lives better and happier now and when they return. And this is something that I know that a lot of people have asked me about. I call it In Service for God and Country, which is the American Legion motto, by the way. I, as many others, grew up between World Wars I and II, during what was known as the Great Depression. At that time, a firm belief in God and country was widespread. Schools started with Bible reading, prayer, the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag, and the national anthem. A lot of these things are now considered, we're not supposed to do them. In our communities, we work together for all and help those in need. Social security was unheard of then. We never doubted that the peace won by our fathers would last forever. It's important that you realize this because we just felt that way. Well, the world has changed since then. I was one of the fortunate ones who were able to continue their education beyond high school. We never suspected that this situation would not last forever. Then, much to the surprise and horror of all, our world began to change, leading rapidly to a worldwide conflagration. Before long, our country, along with many others, was at war. Things had changed. Our young men were conscripted into our armed forces. Our citizens, younger and older, volunteered in great numbers. Our industries were converted or adapted to military defense. Our peaceful country had not been prepared, but that was quickly changed. Before long, our national leaders realized that in view of our increasing need for more personnel and the expansion needed in our armed services, our country had a great untapped resource that could be used to help our nation's women. Many were already providing the needed impetus in our many new defense plans. Of course, it was unthinkable and unacceptable to conscript women into the armed forces, but there were many who might be happy to volunteer to serve their country in helping to bring this war to an end, assist our wounded, and help in any way they were able. Our armed services were open to women volunteers who were urged to, quote, free our men to fight. The response was tremendous, and our country's military history was forever changed. That was our world, not what we had expected, but nevertheless ours and our future to be made. In this changed world, everything looked different, and things seemed sensible that would not have been considered before. Youthful marriages took place in great numbers before the great separation of war. My husband and I were one of those couples. He was a pre-med student, and I was preparing for the education field. He volunteered for the Navy and became an engineering officer. I went into the Cadet Nurse Corps, but had to resign because of a medical problem. My husband had been sent to the Pacific Theater. For a while, I tried being a typical officer's wife, doing genteel charity work and making layettes for bundles for Britain. But I did not feel that I was making a satisfactory contribution to our war effort. My 3 brothers and my husband were all in service, so I felt that I belonged there too. When I felt that my husband would not be back till it was all over, I volunteered for the Women's Army Corps. I wanted to join the naval services with my family, but they would not accept wives of naval officers. In the Army, I became a medical laboratory technician. At least I felt I was doing something constructive. Finally, the war ended. We returned to civilian life and raising, quote, our typical American family. By that time, after much instigation by the American Legion and many others, our legislators passed the GI Bill to educate returning service people and provide the necessary subsistence for them to do so. My husband continued his medical education, and I was able to continue my education. He became a doctor, and I entered the education field along with moonlighting in the medical